So I'm going to just talk briefly about the assumptions that we had about transport during the Games. I'm going to talk about the way in which we developed and implemented our travel demand management programme, what happened, and some of the lessons that we learnt along the way. Okay, now, very briefly then, I expect most of you could probably recite some of these facts and figures to me, but it's just a brief reminder of the scale of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, the two biggest sporting events on earth. And we knew how big the Games were going to be very early on. So it meant that we could do a lot of demand forecasting to work out where the transport hotspots were going to be early on. And we also had a time frame to work from. We knew this very early on. It wasn't just about 16 days plus 12 days of sporting competition. It spread right through the summer of 2012 with the various events associated with, first of all, the Jubilee, but then through the ramp up of venues, training venues, etc., etc. And all of this, of course, was set against a backdrop of media comment. Pick your favourite headline from this. I particularly like Get Set for the Gridlock Games. But you know, there was a certain amount of pressure that transport would be the Achilles heel of delivering a great Games. The transport strategy had been pretty much set for us very early on. It was all about making sure that the athletes got to their events on time. We didn't want a repeat of Atlanta in '96 with athletes missing their events, with Tessa Sanderson having to warm up in the passageway in the coach, with Princess Anne donating her car to Steve Redgrave, etc., etc. We also had a public transport Games, so there was no public parking apart from some blue badge parking at any of the competition venues. So spectators very much encouraged to travel by public transport. But it had to be an accessible Games and it had to be a sustainable Games. So that, if you like, was the context. But to me, it's this next picture which we had very early on in our development, which really set the context for what we were up against. I could show you lots of lovely demand forecasting graphs and lots of lovely capacity and demand comparisons, but to me this summed up the challenge. Now this is the torch relay in Beijing. And okay, there are political and cultural differences associated with the Beijing Games, but this kind of put into perspective what interest it generated there. And if you can spot the torch, there's a prize. And as I mentioned, this was Atlanta. It all looks very innocuous until you start tracing the queues back all the way up into the stadia. Huge queues getting out of stadia onto public transport. Now, we also knew that there had been a huge amount of investment that would benefit the Games. Estimated that there had been about £6.5 billion worth of transport investments that would assist transport delivery during the Games. This was going to be supplemented by temporary Games time transport services like park and ride sites, additional capacity on underground and network rail services, the whole lot. But despite that, we knew that there would still be a significant challenge in terms of demand and capacity. And even when you took into account the capacity increases, it was forecast that there would still be more than 30 minutes to wait at quite a few stations. So, travel demand management was brought into the arena. And we knew that it would work. We did quite a lot of research about what had happened at previous Games. And ever since Atlanta, it's been a part of an Olympic and Paralympic Games. And it's actually a requirement by the IOC for a host city to put a programme like this into place. And there had been reductions of up to 40% experienced at previous games. We did a lot of research in Vancouver before, during and after the Winter Games in 2010 to find out what people were planning to do, what they actually did during the games, and then afterwards, with the benefit of hindsight, to get some customer insights. But they all had a very similar programme. They might have been delivered by different people, but all the elements were fairly similar. Now I'm just going to whiz through these slides, but this was basically how we started to think about what our travel demand management programme should comprise. We brainstormed all the possible things that you can do to affect travel behaviour, and as you can see, we grouped them into fairly high-level categories, and we thought about all the things that we wouldn't be able to do because they cost too much, they were politically unacceptable, or whatever, and they came. That was the first lot to come out, so we got rid of them, and then we looked at the things that other people were already doing. So, for example, park and ride sites capacity creation, the way in which the Olympic route network was enforced would have an impact on the way people behaved and used the road network. So out they came. And that left us, surprisingly, with the nucleus of the travel demand management programme. And this is pretty much what we actually delivered, what sneaked in at the end was actually considering freight as well. But at the beginning, that wasn't part of our programme. In conjunction with this, we had our TDM strategy, and this tells you what we were setting out to do. We wanted to make sure that we were making the best use of the transport networks, and this differed from usual transport travel behaviour change in that, in general, in the UK, it's been about encouraging people not to travel to work by car. But this was about people encouraging people to make the best use of both public transport and the highways network. So this was new. It was also different in that we wanted a short-term behaviour change, and we needed a big short-term behaviour change. So that was very different again. It was different in that we were very geographically targeted. So we worked out where the hotspots were and put our effort into achieving the behaviour change at those geographic locations. And we took our audiences through a journey of behaviour change. So whatever we did, we applied that model, even though that rolled out at different times. I've put this bubble diagram in because it illustrates a few things. We've got the journey of behaviour change down the bottom. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but it also demonstrates that we had different audiences, spectators and workforce and background demand, and different elements of the programme were targeted at different people. And this slide here gives you a summary of the 4 different work streams within our programme. The first one was travel advice for businesses. So businesses were a key audience for us because they not only had their operations to figure out, but also they could directly influence their employees. So there was a huge amount of information and self-help assistance for businesses to make sure that they could keep on running during the games. And similarly, on the other side, freight operators, the distributors of freight. We had a huge marketing and communications campaign, and then we had travel information services. So this is the maps, the guides, the websites, the journey planners and the maps. All of those things had to be developed with travel advice. So that was the core. And our objective was to influence enough people enough. That was kind of what we were there to do. No more, no less. It was an operational budget. That's what we had to do, our short-term behaviour change. And we had the 4 R's, and that applied across all the work streams as well. Firstly, we wanted people to reduce their travel during the games. So that was the top priority. And then the next 3 were of a second priority: retime, reroute or remote. And our reduction was a 30% behaviour change reduction in background demand at hotspot locations. So this is where we have particular issues on the transport network. Now, as I mentioned, we had the journey of behaviour change, and this applied right across the programme. So the first thing we wanted to do was raise an awareness. The games are coming, transport is likely to be sticky, and what we found from our research was that there was very little awareness of when the games were and where it was going to happen, and therefore where the likely transport issues were going to occur. So we had to kind of educate people into all those things. The second one was encouraging people to explore their options, their travel options, and potentially test them out for themselves. Which one works for you? Stage 3 was to activate those options. The games come, okay, actually do it. And then stage 4 was about sustaining that change through the Paralympic Games, because it can be quite common for there to be trickle back during the paras, which come after. And so I thought I would just show you some of the things that you might have seen or used that we developed and put into the field. So in the top left-hand corner there, you have the Get Ahead of the Games website, our little website that was going to be a portal of 6 pages, which was going to link off into other information. In the end, by games time, had 1,300 pages of information. It was so well used and well regarded that people just kept saying, oh no, we won't put that on our website, yours is much better, you put it on yours. So it just boom, boom, like that. And that was in about the space of 6 months. I've put some of the freight campaign collateral in there. There's maps, there's some of the material to help businesses, self-help guides. There's our Twitter feed. Norm, we had a Twitter feed, and we got 63,000 followers in the space of 5 months. So we were really delighted with that, and we got some really high-profile retweets. And then in the bottom left-hand corner there is a screenshot from the Spectator Journey Planner. So we developed a journey planner for spectators, which enable people to plan their journey from anywhere in the UK to a competition venue. And what we developed was some routing strategies. So whilst it returned results which might not be the most intuitive result, it was actually the one that we wanted to encourage spectators to use. And here's some of the marketing collateral that you might have seen as you travelled around the network. This was our Get Ahead of the Games poster. And what we did is made sure that we gave people information, as much information as we possibly could about the likely transport disruption, so that they could make informed decisions about what they were going to do. So on our Get Ahead of the Games website, we published where the transport hotspots were likely to be. So this example here is day 7. So for every day of the Games, we had a different map with different hotspots. And this is for the Olympic route network on the highways. And so people could see where the anticipated problems were likely to be. We did a similar thing for public transport. So for each day of the Games, there was a different map like this. So red is an exceptionally busy station. And if you clicked on a red or any of those buttons, you would then get a grid like this, which explained what was likely to happen if no one changed their behaviour, what was going to happen if you did change your behaviour. And this example is Canary Wharf. So on Friday, the 3rd of August, it's still going to be sticky, even though 30% of people have changed their behaviour. So our message to people at Canary Wharf was about retime on that day. So that was come to work early, finish early or late, and go down the pub, or whatever it was. And so then this was the retime message put into poster form, so avoid the crowds, etc. As I mentioned, this was a spectator journey planner. I don't know if anyone used it, but it had a huge number of hits. A quarter of ticket holders actually used this, so we were delighted with that. Here's an example of the mapping information for spectators, how to get to your events. What I've been talking about so far is all about encouraging people to pre-plan before they set out. When games time came, we knew that we also had the opportunity to influence people when they were actually on the transport network. So by games time, we had to do something different to what's currently done in terms of travel information when you're on the network. So we had a whole heap of real-time information that we put out. And this was a bit of a first for the transport industry because usually transport information is something like Bond Street station is closed and that's it. Continue your journey at street level or whatever it was. But we thought that actually what we want to do is give people advice. We had the advantage of knowing where people wanted to get to mostly. So therefore we could be a lot more bespoke and we could add a layer of advice onto that bald information. Now that sounds really, really easy to do, but it was very, very difficult. There are so many operators involved and stakeholders, and to actually get permission to give out advice was horrendously difficult. And we only just managed to do it. But now that we have done it, then people are expecting it. You know, customers really valued that help. And the way in which we kind of controlled the flow of information was through a daily information update. We had a fact sheet which clearly set out what were the messages about transport for each day of the games. They were pre-agreed with all the different stakeholders, the operators, and then they were reissued for the next day because they were updated based on the experience that we'd had. And so that formed the basis for all of the press releases, all of the daily newsletters and bulletins that we sent out, and also we had a series of planned tweets as well as unplanned tweets that came out. And so that worked really, really well. And so we provided real-time information 24/7. This came from the operators, and it was before we sent anything out, it was all agreed with all the parties. So it sounds very, very easy to do, but it wasn't in fact. But we had a presence in the Transport Coordination Centre. Seems a bit bonkers that TDM people were right in the hub of operations, but that's one of the reasons why this programme worked, is because we integrated what we were doing with what was the the operational picture. So there's just some examples of some of the advice and information that we sent. And then the next slides that I've got here are just some facts and figures about kind of like the scale of the programme. We spent £32 million doing this, but we had a huge amount of success and reach. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we got to 611,000 employees via businesses. All of those businesses, there was 550 of them nearly, developed a Games Time action plan in our hotspot locations, and they were given specific advice. So we had a panel of consultants zooming around, giving up to 7.5 days of site-specific advice to businesses. But there's a whole heap of facts and figures about what we actually delivered. And similarly, on the next page, this is kind of the web facts and figures. Yes, over 1 million travel advice emails were sent out by TfL containing the information that was agreed. So, what happened? Well, we met our target. A third, so it was just over a third of Londoners did something different during the games. The weekday behaviour change during the Olympic Games was 35%, and during the Paras it was 30%. So we were pretty much bang on. We're absolutely delighted with the results. But surprisingly, overall demand on the transport networks, on the public transport networks, was up. So what we had the effect of was actually spreading the peak. So if you look at all of the demand graphs, then instead of doing that as usual, then we actually kind of did that. So that's why the tubes appeared empty. They weren't empty. They've never carried as many people as they did during the games. It was all because people had retimed. Reduce. So reduce was the favourite of the 4 Rs, but that was closely followed by retimed. And as I said, record patronage on the tubes, DLR, London Overground, were all reporting record patronage. So then contrast the headlines. We couldn't really be any more pleased than this, really. What have we learnt? Well, we've learnt that mass behaviour change can be achieved, but we did have to spend money on it. We started thinking about the strategy in 2008, and we started talking to businesses in the autumn of 2010, and then it was the January in 2012 that we really started talking to background demand. So we were we spent a lot of time preparing our programme and thinking about the best time to talk to people and who the best audiences were. So yes, we did spend money on it. I think the key to success is that we were very truthful about the amount of disruption that people were going to experience if nobody changed their behaviour. So all of those grids on the public transport, the highways, hotspots, they were all freely available, and that's what we told people about, their personal disruption, and enabling people to find the information and work it out for themselves. You know, how can I change my behaviour? And we integrated it with operational functions. It's never really been done before in the transport world. And so, looking to the future, it's early days yet, but TfL has set up a specialist TDM unit to integrate the behaviour change lessons into its day-to-day operations. That organisation has some quite significant challenges ahead of it. For example, London Bridge Station is going to be taken apart and put back together again shortly. An exceptionally busy station. So they're thinking about how they can apply the lessons, TDM lessons from the games, into managing things like disruption events, like station rebuilds and line closures and improvements. And it's also beginning to think about how it manages special events, think about those differently. Behaviour change in the transport world has significantly climbed up the agenda in many organisations, TfL, DFT, because of what we did. I think it's fair to say that travel behaviour change was sort of in the doldrums slightly, and we had to do a huge amount to convince stakeholders that what we were doing was the right thing, because we had no proof that it was actually going to work until day one of the games. So I'd be really interested actually to hear your experiences about behaviour change and whether there's any takeaways from what I've talked about, and whether that's of any interest to your organisations and industries. It certainly proved to have some exciting spin-offs in the transport world. So there we are. I hope that's been a bit of a rattle through. There's quite a lot of information behind it, but I hope that's interesting.